Imagine, if you will, a continent sort of grappling with its own identity, almost like a clash of ancient beliefs and modern ways of thinking playing out right now, not in dusty old books, but right on the streets. Today, we're diving into that very struggle. We're exploring how Europe and North America, too, are navigating the profound influence of Islam, particularly within the context of Western conservatism. Yeah, our mission here in this deep dive is really to dissect that complex relationship, conservatism's commitment to things like tradition, family, liberty, and how that sits alongside the growing presence of Islam. We want to pull out the most important nuggets of knowledge, basically give you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed without getting bogged down is a huge challenge, multifaceted, and these debates are, frankly, reshaping things.
And what's really fascinating, I think, is how these, ancient belief systems aren't just sitting side by side. They're actively clashing right now in real time. It's genuinely reshaping societies that were fundamentally built on Enlightenment ideas. This isn't just talk, is it? It's a debate about the very soul of these nations.
Absolutely. Now, before we get deeper into this, if you're finding this interesting and you want more insights like this, you should definitely visit Mind Expansion Daily. They have incredible information that really helps connect the dots. You'll find their link right there in our description. And while you're at it, please do hit that like button and subscribe. It honestly helps us so much in bringing these kinds of explorations to more curious people like you. Also, if you appreciate what we're sharing today, maybe consider buying us a coffee. The link for that is also in the description. Your support genuinely keeps these deep dives going. And look, as we unpack all this complexity, we really want to hear from you. Leave a comment below. Tell us if you agree or maybe disagree with how we're summarizing these big ideas. Your perspective is valuable. And tell us where you're listening from. We're actually on a mission to expand our reach across the globe. Okay, so let's unpack this fundamental friction point. The perceived incompatibility, as some see it, between certain orthodox interpretations of Islamic doctrine and, core Western values. Critics often point out that Western conservatism champions things like, equality of the sexes, free speech, secular government. But some Islamic frameworks seem to present a very different picture. What makes that so tricky?
Well, I think the challenge is just how deeply ingrained these differences are. They're not superficial things, are they? They touch on really fundamental parts of society, family structures, the rule of law. It's maybe less a direct head-on clash and more like two very different operating systems suddenly trying to run on the same hardware.
Right. And one of the really consistent flashpoints, especially that conservatives highlight, is gender roles. Conservative views in the West, often with Judeo-Christian roots, lean towards individual equality choice. But then you see, in some Islamic traditions or texts, practices like polygamy, veiling, differences in inheritance, things that just stand in pretty stark contrast.
And this is where it becomes quite visceral, I think, for a lot of people. We've seen huge discussions around things like honor killings. Now, obviously condemned by mainstream Muslim scholars, but they still tragically happen in some communities. There was even a 2023 report from the EU Agency for Fundamental Rights documenting over 1,200 cases of gender-based violence linked to what they termed cultural imports from Muslim-majority regions. That kind of thing really fuels the narrative that Western norms are being eroded, and it often clashes directly with, say, Western feminism's push for complete parity.
Which brings us to another really, really tricky area, free speech. How it gets challenged. I mean, the attacks on Charlie Hebdo back in 2015, the awful stabbing of Salman Rushdie more recently, they're pretty grim reminders, aren't they, of the perceived dangers when it comes to critiquing Islam. What's the core challenge there for Western societies? Balancing that speech with sensitivity.
It's the paradox, isn't it? Western tolerance itself is being tested by demands for, deference. And the big question is, how far does that tolerance bend when faced with religious sensitivities? We've definitely seen a sort of chill effect on free speech. Think about conservative speakers like Ben Shapiro facing huge protests on U.S. campuses, accused of Islamophobia, or even media self-censorship, outlets being wary of fatwas or worse. These aren't just isolated things. They signal a much broader challenge to those basic Enlightenment principles.
And then there's the whole governance and law aspect, the worry about parallel legal systems emerging. You mentioned Sharia courts in the UK handling, over 100 cases a year, divorces, financial disputes, operating alongside civil law.
Right, and this creates genuine apprehension for some, particularly conservative think tanks like the Heritage Foundation, warning about so-called no-go zones areas where they argue Western law seems to be, well, giving way to more theocratic norms. Take Malmö's Rosengård district in Sweden. There have been reports, at least, of vigilante patrols enforcing Islamic dress codes. It's not just about legal procedures, then. It's a deeper fear that liberal democracy is being sort of hollowed out from the inside, maybe one cultural concession at a time.
And these aren't just abstract ideas, are they? They show up in daily life. Things like burqa bans in France, the prohibitions on minarets in Switzerland, or even those intense debates about Ramadan accommodations in schools, halal meals, prayer breaks. It all sparks these questions about multiculturalism and maybe the price of social cohesion.
Exactly. And you see political figures like Marine Le Pen in France or Tommy Robinson in the UK really effectively using these issues. They argue against what they call cultural suicide.
Right.
They'll often point to figures like, Europe taking in 2.4 million asylum seekers in 2022, many from Muslim nations, framing it as a demographic shift that could irreversibly change the cultural balance.
So, okay, we see these deep differences. How does it all actually play out on the ground? If we zoom in on Europe, for example, that seems to be where these fault lines really show up most clearly.
Yeah, Europe is definitely ground zero in many ways, and it's where you really see how political reactions and public feeling can shift so dramatically after specific events. Take the 2015 migrant crisis. Germany saw over 1 million arrivals, mostly from Syria, Afghanistan. That didn't just strain resources, it seemed to ignite a real identity crisis within the country.
That shift around Merkel's "Wir schaffen das," we can do this, her optimism was pretty stark, wasn't it? For some, it was upholding humanitarian values, but for many others, it just turned into disillusionment. And you can draw a pretty direct line to the rise of the AfD party, now Germany's second largest party, campaigning explicitly against Islamization. And then, of course, those Cologne New Year's Eve assaults in 2015-16, involving hundreds of North African men. That became such a powerful symbol, a rallying cry for tighter borders and assimilation policies.
And then look at France. Their concept of laïcité, that very strict state secularism demanding public neutrality on religion, faces huge challenges, especially in the banlieues, the suburbs. Unemployment among Muslim youth there is incredibly high, around 40%. That's a potential breeding ground for radicalism, for alienation from mainstream French identity.
And the stakes are just tragically clear. Events like the 2015 Bodorfland massacre or the later beheadings of teachers, just horrific. So in response, you get conservative figures like Eric Zemmour talking openly about remigration, while even Macron pushes for a Republican reconquest with mandatory civics and language courses. It really shows how deep this goes into national policy.
Absolutely. And if you hop across the channel to the UK, they face their own profound issues with those grooming gang scandals. Rotherham, Rochdale, mainly Pakistani Muslim men exploiting vulnerable white girls. A 2014 inquiry found over 1,400 victims. And critically, it highlighted significant delays in police action, partly due to fears of being accused of racism.
Which really fueled a strong conservative backlash, didn't it? Demands for accountability, a rethink of multicultural policies. It's also interesting how Brexit tied into this. Polling showed immigration anxiety was a major factor, with about 52% of Leave voters citing border control as key. It shows how tangled these issues become in the public mind.
And it's not just those countries. You see this pattern elsewhere in Europe, too. The Netherlands' Geert Wilders' Party for Freedom surged partly on anti-Islam stances, even suggesting Quran bans. Denmark implemented those controversial ghetto laws, forced relocations, assimilation quotas in immigrant-heavy areas. It really sums up a kind of conservative reaction demanding that tolerance needs to have, well, teeth, clear boundaries.
So you have this conservative pushback. It's clearly mobilizing voters, demanding stricter borders, more funding for de-radicalization, a sort of renewed cultural confidence. But are there downsides to this more assertive approach?
Oh, definitely. It's a classic double-edged sword, isn't it? It can be very effective at galvanizing a certain base, no doubt, but it absolutely risks alienating moderates, and, maybe more damagingly, it risks painting all Muslims with the same radical brush. You mentioned polling Pew Research in 2024 found that while, 68% of Western Europeans view Islam unfavorably, only 22% actually support blanket bans. That suggests people want solutions, but maybe more nuanced ones than just slogans. It highlights that real tension. How do you tackle legitimate concerns without just fostering prejudice?
Right. Which brings us to another layer of complexity. Conservatism itself isn't, a single block on this issue. There are actually pretty deep divisions within the movement.
Yeah.
How do those different factions approach this?
Yeah, that's crucial. It really shows this internal struggle within conservative thinking about the best way to handle rapid cultural shifts, immigration, integration, all of it. On one side, you've got what you might call the hawks. Think figures like Viktor Orban in Hungary, Matteo Salvini in Italy. They push for a fortress mentality, razor wire borders, naval blockades, often framing Islam itself as an existential threat.
Orban's been very explicit, hasn't he? His idea of Christian democracy basically bars Muslim settlement. He points to Hungary's, 99% Christian makeup as something to be actively preserved. And Salvini's Italians first rhetoric has a similar ring to it. Cultural preservation comes first. But how does that contrast with other conservative views?
Well, in pretty stark contrast, you have the doves, or maybe bridge builders. People like David Cameron with his big society idea, or in the U.S., politicians like Marco Rubio. They tend to emphasize counter-extremism through alliances. Their argument is, look, jihadism is the enemy, not the entire global population of 1.8 billion Muslims. You see programs like the UK's Prevent Strategy controversial, yes, but it has worked with communities to de-radicalize thousands. And importantly, we have to acknowledge Muslim conservatives, people like Irshad Manji in Canada or Zuhdi Jasser in the US, who actively blend their faith with Western liberal values. They've even founded groups like the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. This internal diversity on both sides often gets missed.
So if those are the poles, is there a middle ground? Could education be part of it? Maybe curricula that really unpack Islam's diversity from Sufi mysticism to Salafi rigor could help humanize things, foster understanding?
I think it absolutely could. Initiatives like Germany running Islam seminars for imams, trying to align their preaching with democratic norms. That's a promising step. It raises that big question, doesn't it? Can cultural survival, or salvation if you like, demand mutual evolution? Conservatism itself has always adapted. It absorbed Enlightenment ideas without dissolving. Maybe there's potential for it to integrate, say, Islamic anti-extremist voices. And Islam itself isn't static. It has reformist streams. Look at Tunisia's secular push post-Arab Spring, or Indonesia's pluralistic Pancasila philosophy. By actually recognizing and maybe even courting these moderate and reformist voices, conservatives could potentially find powerful allies, turning perceived threats into partners in defending pluralism.
So ultimately, what this deep dive really seems to show is that this whole conservatism-Islam debate isn't just a simple us versus them or saving versus threat. It feels less like a zero-sum game and more like a call for, well, reinvention, maybe on both sides. The West's strength has often been its ability to synthesize different ideas, hasn't it? Greek reason, Christian grace, Roman law, Renaissance humanism. Excluding Islam entirely might betray that legacy, but maybe embracing it uncritically risks dilution. The real insight might not be that conservatives grapple with Islam, but how this challenge forces the West to really look at its own definition of tolerance, that tension between being open and needing to preserve oneself.
That's exactly right. And this is where you need those rigorous integration policies. Policies that demand reciprocity, newcomers learning and respecting the laws and customs, but also outreach that actively boost moderate voices within Muslim communities. And the data, interestingly, does offer some hope. That 2024 Gallup poll finding 78% of American Muslims prioritize their U.S. identity is significant. European surveys show second-gen immigrants often becoming more secular, more integrated. Even Europol data suggesting radicalization rates dipped 15% since 2020, partly because of community interventions. If you connect that to the bigger picture, conservatives, with their emphasis on community, tradition, resilience, they could be uniquely positioned to lead, not as conquerors, but as pragmatic stewards of a really complex future.
Yeah, the real enemy here feels like complacency. Without bold action, and that probably means a mix of things, clearer borders, funding for de-radicalization, but also confidence in Western values, the risk is just a slow fade. The path forward looks messy. It needs both clear lines and empathy. What we really need, perhaps, is deeper understanding. Conservatives getting the nuances of Islam, Muslims engaging seriously with Western critiques, even the uncomfortable ones. Only then, maybe, can we navigate this crossroads towards a future that's both fortified and genuinely inclusive? Something to think about. What does the fortified, inclusive future actually mean to you? We've certainly covered some incredibly complex ground today. We really hope you found this deep dive valuable. If you did, please do consider buying us that coffee. The link's right there in the description. Your support honestly keeps us going. And please remember, we want to hear your voice. Drop a comment below. What are your thoughts? Agree, disagree. What really stood out to you from this discussion? And definitely let us know where in the world you're tuning in from. We're trying to build a truly global community of learners over at Mind Expansion Daily, so please make sure you like and subscribe for more insights.